is that so I am going to show a video in during the course of this class that I don't have any rights to really show, and so we'll probably stop the recording for that, and I'll give you warning whenever that happens, Will, and then we can just sew those two videos together. So
Hello, 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 hello.
hello.
Yeah.
Oh, you were testing your mic. I got you, Chris. So yeah, again, welcome everybody. Last week we had talked about you know looking at ministry alongside folks with disabilities, and we talked about it in terms of diversity instead of deficit, and we talked about the gifts of some of our friends with disabilities. Chris shared some about his ministry, and we talked not just about the possibility of folks with disabilities sharing in Christian witness, but the necessity of it. And so this week, have invited my friend Matt O'Hearn to come. Matt, say hi to everyone. Okay. And Matt has tremendous gifts for ministry as well. And I got to share a lot of ministry with him in St. Augustine, Florida, where I was working with Young Life Capernaum. And so one of the things, if you know Matt well, one of Matt's loves alongside Jesus is a love for toys, and he is kind of like a toy master. I don't know, Matt, I feel like you probably have 10,000 toys if we were to look around your room. And man, you are a collector, but aside from being a collector, you are also incredibly generous. You know, I have so many toys around my house, and my kids, Matt knows that I like Batman, and so my kids will never know that all action figures are not Batman. They will just think to be an action figure is to be Batman, and I just can't think of any better way to raise my children than amidst 50 Batman action figures. So we would have these meetings there with Young Life, and Matt, whenever you were there at any time, but especially if you were new, one of the rites of passage was to get an action figure curated from Matt. Was that Jesus that you were showing us there, Matt?
Yeah, small one.
Oh, nice. Yeah, and he said small one because probably, I don't know, there might be 50 Jesuses in that room there with you.
Yeah.
And that was always another part of your ministry that I really loved, was the way in which I would be talking about Jesus, and sometimes I can talk in abstract ways. And is that Jesus or is that a Jedi? It's hard to know.
It was Obama.
Oh, it's Barack Obama. Nice one.
Oh my God! Wow.
So
which Star Wars Obama? Star Wars Obama. Yeah.
That's Star Wars Obama.
Yeah.
Man, that is such a deep representation of like the depth of your toy collection. That's perfect. So I would be talking about Jesus, and Matt would be up with a Jesus action figure, or I'd be sharing some story from scriptures about Jesus and Mary, and out of nowhere, the whole cast would kind of come out, and it was this excellent asset to whatever words I was saying. Folks were seeing it kind of lived out there with Matt. I remember one time at camp, I think we were talking with students about sin, and Zach Carson, who's here in this class, he was
Zach Carson.
No better introduction to Zach Carson than Matt's excitement, or than Chris's excitement. And
it's
we
been a long time.
It probably has. Zach is away at seminary at Covenant now, but so yeah, we're talking about sin with the students, and Matt, you could tell that the conversation was troubling him, and he had whatever it might have been a Captain America action figure at the start,
Oh,
but as he became more troubled, we saw kind of Matt pull out his Jesus action figure, and it was, whatever was worrying him in the conversation about sin, you could tell that he was the way in which he was receiving comfort was getting behind Jesus, and that became like a parable for the sin talk. Whatever way I was trying to explain it to all of these students, nothing could be more effective than just Matt quietly, subtly, just pulling Jesus into the conversation, and that was so impactful that, I don't know, that probably has been 8 years ago or near enough, but I think Zach and I still remember
Is
that
it this
well.
one?
It might have been. Who knows, Matt? So only you, maybe.
Yeah. Obama with me too.
Perfect. And Kendra didn't know I was going to bring her into this class as well, but my friend Kendra is here visiting, and part of the discussion today, I think that I want to lift up is the way in which we a lot of times approach ministry in general, and particularly ministry with folks with disabilities, thinking about what they need, but we don't often start with all the gifts that they have to offer. And so that's going to be a common refrain in this class over the next couple of weeks. Kendra is really good. Kendra has a lot of gifts, and also she's really good. And also Phyllis Gutman is here in the class, and I'll pick on her too. They're two of my friends that I think of as being wonderful connectors, and people who see the gifts in the community and then connect people. Kendra, I never know what's going on, and then Kendra calls me and fills me in, and I kind of have some better, clearer sense of things. And Phyllis is the same way. And whenever I got to Tampa, I don't think I would have known anything about the resources or the people that were around if it weren't for Phyllis kind of lifting up the strength in this community to me. They're kind of both wonderful in that way. So last week I was talking about mission and the witness of folks with disabilities. And I was kind of riffing on these two books here. Both of them are by Benjamin Connor, and I'm gonna.
oh wow!
It is impossible to see through there, and I'm going to share with you guys via email what those books are. So if reading is a way that you connect to these kind of things, you could get a hold of those. But this week I'm going to be talking a little bit about this other book by Mike Mather, who he wrote a book called Having Nothing, Possessing Everything. And it is, well, I'll tell a story about Mike Mather as well as I can remember it. And so Mike Mather, he was a pastor at a church, a Methodist church, I think up in Maryland. And they have a food pantry, and they're, an inner city church. And a lot of times the way in which mission is just done in the church, aside from folks with disabilities, is that, oh, thank you, Will, for posting that link. We think, there's a community of people who are in need, and we will bring our stuff, we will bring our riches and help them out. And so Mike Mather is in this inner city church, and he is preaching. If I had not let my book out, I would be better able to say exactly what scripture it was, but maybe it was Acts 2, where Pentecost is happening, and Peter is quoting the prophet Joel, talking about in the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. And anyway, afterwards, he's having fellowship in the fellowship hall of that church, probably a Methodist Church, potluck dinner sort of a situation.
Oh,
And Chris, I can hear you're connecting with potluck dinners at Methodist churches, and I'm with you. So he's there, and this woman, older woman in the congregation, says, "Do you really believe that God gives all people gifts?" And he said, having just preached on it, he was powerless but to say, "Yes, I do." And she says, "Well, how come when people come here to our food pantry or come to our church, you just ask them how poor they are?" They had this practice, when people would come to the food pantry or come to receive service, the questionnaires were all about their needs. And that was a convicting question to Mike Mather. And after that, they changed the ways in which they started to relate to their neighbors. And when people would come, they wouldn't ask them as much about what their needs were. They would ask them about their gifts and the things that, and instead of a ministry of supplying instead of just giving people things, they would pay them to share their gifts. So you guys will not probably remember well the words asset-based community development, but that is a way of engaging with folks that looks at their strengths instead of their weaknesses. And Mike Mather, and his church, they were working on this. And Mike Mather now, I think, is pastoring in Boulder, Colorado, and he's working for also teaching this asset-based community development there. Now, here's what I'm going to do to further talk about this is I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to show a cartoon. And why am I showing you a cartoon? It is because long after you forget the phrase asset-based community development, and long after you forget anything I said, I think that you will think about these dogs speaking in Australian accents, and you'll think about Jesus's humble ministry of seeing people, affirming them, investing in them, and you'll think about God, who spreads God's gifts on all people and has given us a mission, but also goes before us in mission into every place and every heart. And there's nowhere that we're going that God isn't already. And that is true of folks with disabilities. That's true of any community on the margins. So I'm going to share this. I want to talk to you for a moment a little bit about your gifts and some of the good ways in which you have shared them there at church, there at Young Life. Can you tell us a little bit about your sense of ministry, and what does it mean for you when you share a toy with somebody?
I don't know, Zach. It's a bit tricky.
It is a little bit tricky.
Yeah.
Has anybody else received?
You want me to help you, Matt?
Chris, have you ever gotten a toy from Matt?
Yeah, I did. He got me the Captain Hook.
So one of the things I wanted to lift up in some of those articles that went out in an email just before this class, there were two articles. One was about belonging, and that's a screen that I can share, I think. And you guys, so Eric Carter talks about the different elements and ways in which a congregation and folks can experience belonging. So inclusion can get us some distance, right? We can become, we can be a part of a church, we can be in the church service, but it doesn't have the same rich sense that belonging does. When you belong in a certain place, it gives you this deeper sense of being a part of it.
I hated the before.
And Chris, I'm just gonna keep muting you there for just a second. So supported, cared for, befriended, needed, loved, being present, invited, welcome, known, and accepted. I think that we all have some different sense when we're in a congregation. These were all qualities that folks within the congregation lifted up as they lifted those up as the ways in which they knew that they were a part of something. And these are not really special needs in a lot of ways. They are, I think, things that are needed by everybody, things that each of us need in order to be loved, to feel like we are a part of things. One of the ways that...
Welcome.
Hey, Chris, I'm gonna keep muting you for just a second, bud. Leave it muted until I get back to you, if you would. So through Matt's gifts, Matt has gifts to make people feel befriended, loved, invited, welcomed, and I think that each one does. Would have gone on to share the ways in which I would have gone on to show the ways in which this Australian cattle dog identifies all those things in her classmates, but also one of the main theses of this class is going to be not just the gifts that folks with disabilities have, but the gifts that each one of us have, in the way that including folks with disabilities helps us to see and kind of realize those. Each of you may not feel like you have gifts, but in little subtle ways, we can lift up belonging. We can, maybe you just have a love for toys. Maybe you just have just boundless enthusiasm like Chris does. Those may not seem remarkable. We in the church like to lift up the gifts of folks with seminary degrees or people who can speak well and eloquently. But Matt, your ministry of toys, much more than anything that I did in Young Life, I think let people know that they belong, that they were accepted when they got there, that the care in which you brought helped them to be known. The other thing, the other little article that I'll kind of lift up briefly here was just about, as this is a practical thing as we're kind of getting into this ministry, but I think a lot of people have just a question of, how do I talk about disability? How do I talk about, what ways do we just speak about this to help people connect to things? So there within this, this article is from the National Center on Disability and Journalism. And so I want to lift up just the 4 bullet points that they list at first there in that article. Because I think if you get these 4 bullet points, you'll get most everything else. So it says to refer to disability only when it's relevant to the story and when diagnosis comes from a reputable source, such as a medical professional or other licensed professional. So most of the time, people just want to be referred to. I have blepharitis. It means that I get like these little crusties on my eyes. I think my status as a person should always lead. You wouldn't think, that guy with the crusty eyes, you would think, Zach. Just in the same way, if you have a disability, you want to be known as mostly just by your name first, right? And unless disability is relevant. The other thing, the next point within that was, when possible, use people first language unless otherwise indicated by the source. And so you will hear me refer often to folks with disabilities, people with disabilities, my friends with disabilities, rather than disabled person or, a negative example would be, like that Down syndrome kid or that cerebral palsy guy or something like that. That there's a way in which I hope that already kind of just hearing it feels a little bit awkward. The next point there is, when possible, ask the source how they would like to be described. I talk a lot about disability, and that's the way in which a lot of folks with disabilities will say, I prefer that term because, in some ways it's descriptive of my reality. There are some things that I can't do, and also there shouldn't be a stigma behind it. And so there's campaigns like Say the Word. So they want you to use disability, but also special needs is another common phrase. On the board of the church that we're planting, there's a guy named Wade Wetherington, who some of you might know, and he's just wonderful guy. And I made the mistake of kind of not asking him. He is the parent of a child with disabilities, and he prefers the term special needs. And I had just been working, talking about disability, and as we got to talking, and I finally asked him, and he said, I actually don't use the word disability because my daughter Jessica, my clearest sense of her is that she's not disabled. When I think about Jessica, I think about all the gifts that she has, and so disability doesn't feel descriptive to me. And so if disability is the accepted term, that what's more important is asking people, talking to them, and getting a sense from them how they would like to be talked about. If what language they would like to use. Folks in the deaf community, to them, deaf is just part of their culture, and so they want to be referred to as being called deaf people, rather than people with hearing loss or people experiencing deafness. That's their preference. Also, some folks within the autism community said they want to be referred to as autistic because, or as an autistic, because to them, their autism is actually an asset. It's just part of the diversity of humanity. And so that's the way in which they'd like to be talked about. Any questions about that so far? Great. So that's all pretty clear. And then the last point, avoid words like diversibility or handicapable unless using them in direct quotes or to refer to a movement. So language is super tricky, and it's going to change. It's changing faster than ever, and it can make you feel anxious to engage with people when you don't know how best to refer to them or to talk about them. So of course we're going to talk most importantly just about people, and then if we need to talk about, if it's important to talk about disability, as sometimes it is, in the course of this class I'm talking about it endlessly, always ask. So I want to just open things up to questions in general about the class, to think about looking around at our neighbors, looking for their gifts, making that the leading edge of our ministry rather than their needs. Just to invite comment on that.
Zach.
Hey, Bill.
I'm grateful you posted that article about that you just discussed because can you hear me okay?
Yeah, hear you
Oh,
great.
okay. As I mentioned last week, I served what I thought was a couple of weeks turned into a 5-year interim at a church that even now focuses its ministry on, and this gets into language. We had quite some discussions there. Some people did not like the word disability. Some preferred special needs. So all I'm saying is, and I haven't read the articles, I just got it this morning, but I look forward to reading it. All I'm saying is that was a tender subject. That was even among those who came, primarily the contact was through Special Olympics. Even among them, there was some disagreement at times about language. And all I can say is my testimony would be, it was an ongoing journey to understand how each person preferred to be addressed.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And whatever is in the content of that article, 5 years from now, you will, if they don't update it, you won't be able to lean on that article for kind of safe guidelines. And even, and they will, it says in the article, you can't lean on this. This is maybe, gives some kind of helpful contours of the conversation, but I don't know, figuring out how people ought to be addressed is always a conversation that happens best in friendship. And so it's important to know some of the sensibilities that they lift up in that article, but much more, it's important to lean into friendship and lean into asking and talking about folks. Kendra, if I want to talk about, and you're muted, I'll ask you to unmute. If I wanted to talk to you about disability, and we have before.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know. It's important for me to hear from you how you want to talk about that, and to, and sometimes you might not talk about it in the same way that some article or disability rights advocate recommends. But
my mom
it's more important.
always told us that we were like everybody else and that we shouldn't be labeled.
Absolutely. And so if I'm talking about my friend Kendra, mostly it's just important to talk about my friend Kendra. One of the things that Mike Mather talks about in his book, Having Nothing, Possessing Everything, is about, hearing from people, hearing from them about their gifts. A lot of times we think about witness as what we're going to say to people about Jesus, or what we're going to say to people about the church. But I think that when I'm advocating, and what I think these little Australian dogs would have advocated for, is a ministry of listening. So that as Christians, if we are doing much more listening in general, then we are going to be leading forward with a better foot in Christian ministry. So that means listening to our friends with disabilities, but it means listening to one another. And we talked a little bit about evocative witness at the end of last class, and there are gifts that people bring to the church, but there are also gifts. Sometimes people's needs are in fact a gift. John Swinton, who's another disability theologian guy, he talks about this guy who a guy he knew who had kind of significant support needs. He had cerebral palsy, and this aid worker who would help him get to church. And so the aid worker, though, is a kind of outspoken atheist, but he's going to mass every day with this guy. And then in the course of time, unfortunately, this guy dies. The guy with cerebral palsy, and the aid worker is talking to John, and he says, John, I miss the mass. I miss being a part of this church. And all this time I thought that I was doing something for this guy, but it turns out he was really doing something for me. And a lot of times in the class that Ken and I worked in, Ken and Kendra are brother and sister. And so Ken's in a Bible study right now, so he's not with us, but I shared a little bit about his story last class. In that class that we volunteered in, there were a lot of guys who didn't speak and didn't communicate with words, and it made us listen more closely. And Ken was really good at listening. And so I think that we all experience in the church, sometimes we feel very well known in the church, and we feel like everybody sees us and can hear us, but sometimes we feel really missed. And I think that the evocative witness of some of our friends with disabilities who might not communicate well with words, but have these tremendous gifts, the building the mission muscle to listen well is going to be something that can change the church for our friends with disabilities as we listen better to them, but also changes the church better for us as folks around us start to listen better, to start to do all those things on that wheel of belonging. Is anybody here wish that they felt a deeper sense of belonging in their church? I certainly do. And it would be good news for folks with disabilities, but I know that there's this selfishness within me where I just want the church to be better, full stop. And I think that when we lean on all of the apparent gifts, when we lean on efficiency or prudence or all of these things, it doesn't build within us some of these aspects of Christian faith that are really vital. Is there anything else within that wheel or within that, I guess, thinking about evocative witness or thinking about listening to folks within the church in general, or particularly in terms of folks with disabilities? Can any folks who are either parents or folks with disabilities that would identify that way, can you speak at all on the difference between, I don't know, coming into a church, feeling seen, or that sense of belonging, or a time when it was absent? Yeah, Carmen.
I can't hear her.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There you go.
Holy cow.
I think the thing that always used to bother me the most is people would come up to us and speak to us, but not speak to Andrew. And Andrew's quite sociable. I mean, those that know him know he's quite the social butterfly. And then, you can talk to him, you can ask him. They were afraid of him. I sometimes got the feeling it wasn't that. He's never been afraid of anything. He'll walk into a place and take his seat, and it's you either accept me the way I am, or I wish I was like that, or but I'm here. But I noticed for some people that would be uncomfortable, maybe because they've never maybe been around us. We've always told him he's special, so we always call it special needs in our home. And
Oh boy.
like they were afraid of him, or and Andrew has some physical disabilities too, so maybe they thought he was a little fragile or whatever. And until people took the time to get to know him, because of course when we were going to church there was no special needs ministry, and he kind of assimilated into children's church, and then he assimilated into the high school ministry, then he assimilated into the college ministry. So he was always on his own in these ministries, but there was always that couple of kids that really connected with him, and they would come and tell me how amazing Andrew was. And I said, oh, what does he tell you today? And they were amazed at how well he listened, because he can be difficult to understand, but he would sit in the Sunday school class and he would know everything that was going on. He would come and give us a recap on the way back of the Sunday school lesson, which I found amazing. That he caught on more than I did. He probably listened better than I did in Sunday school, and just things like that. So we've been in places where we kind of felt like maybe we won't come back, and then we've been in places where we said, well, it's time for them to start to get to know people like Andrew. So that's how we kind of experienced church. So we found a real ministry for him, which is where he goes now. Which obviously now we're not going because of the COVID, but. Kendra can attest to that. They feel very accepted at their church. They feel that they have a say in their church. They can tell them, this is what we want. This is what we'd like to do. And people listen, because they have their own. But that's not always been this case for them. It's what people think they want for them, not what they want.
Thanks for sharing that, Carmen. And Chris, was your hand up or were you just waving? Oh. Yeah, I think there are a lot of wonderful things at that church, Carmen. And I would say, though, some of the best parts of it are, for anybody, are the parts where Andrew is well included. He brings a lot of gifts to, I don't know, the Bible study that I had where, and we would start out every class, Andrew would kind of tell us where to start the prayer requests and things like that. That's my favorite Bible study I've ever been a part of.
He likes to be in charge.
Sure.
Hi.
Hey, Chris. Any?
Oh, sorry about that. I was trying to tell my friend that one at Tampa. I was trying to tell him say hi.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks for bringing warmth into a Zoom call. I think this, right. This is a better Zoom call for. You're feeling free to extend that hospitality. So we're coming to the end of it, and I know that we're going to, we want to make space for the next Zoom class coming through, but I was hoping, Kendra, you would often close out the Bible study that I was a part of with you in prayer. And it would be a comfort to me if you close this class out in prayer.
God, thank y'all for this, and thanks for Zach and this Zoom call. And we learned a lot today, Lord. Keep us safe through the day and keep everyone in America safe. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right, friends. Good to be with you all today, and we'll look forward to seeing you all next week. Okay.
Okay. Bye.